over 150 million cans. That was the unbelievable amount of Spam produced and shipped during World War II. A small metal can, carried across oceans, delivered to soldiers fighting thousands of miles away from home. To some people, it was just cheap canned meat. To others, it was the food that arrived when nothing else could. During the darkest years of the war, armies faced a massive challenge. How do you feed millions of soldiers scattered across the world? Fresh meat spoiled, transportation was dangerous, and every meal had to survive long journeys through battle zones. Then came Spam. It was simple, it was affordable, and it could survive almost anywhere. American soldiers ate it on the front lines. Allied nations depended on it during ration shortages, and millions of civilians saw it as a symbol of survival. But Spam was not always loved. Soldiers created jokes about eating it again and again. Some became tired of seeing the same can in every meal. Yet behind those jokes was a remarkable story. A story of innovation, war, sacrifice, and survival. Because this small can of meat became much more than food. It became a piece of history. So how did Spam go from a factory product in America to a wartime legend that fed millions around the world? This is the untold story of Spam, the meat that helped feed a nation during World War II. Before Spam became a symbol of World War II, it was simply an idea created inside an American food company during a time of uncertainty. The year was 1937. America was still recovering from the effects of the Great Depression. Millions of families were searching for affordable food. People needed meals that were not only cheap, but also practical and long-lasting. At the same time, food companies were facing their own challenges. One major problem was pork. Certain cuts of meat were extremely popular, but others, like pork shoulder, were often overlooked. For the Hormel Foods company in Minnesota, this created an opportunity. Instead of letting valuable meat go unused, they searched for a way to transform it into a product that was affordable, convenient, and easy to store. The result was a canned meat product called Spam. It was made from pork, combined with other simple ingredients, and sealed inside a can that could last much longer than fresh meat. When it was introduced in 1937, nobody knew this small can would one day become connected with one of the biggest conflicts in human history. At first, Spam was marketed as a modern convenience food, a product for families who wanted something quick and reliable. It did not look like a revolutionary invention. It was just a simple can sitting on grocery store shelves. But a few years later, the world would change forever, and that simple can would become one of the most important foods of World War II. Because when nations went to war, the ability to feed millions of people became just as important as weapons and soldiers. And Spam was about to find its biggest purpose. By the end of the 1930s, the world was moving toward a devastating conflict. Countries were preparing for war. And one question became more important than ever. How do you feed millions of soldiers fighting far away from home? For any modern army, food was not just about survival. It was about strength. A hungry soldier could not fight. A weak supply system could destroy an entire military operation. But feeding an army across oceans came with enormous challenges. Fresh meat was difficult to transport. It could spoil quickly. And battlefields were often thousands of miles away from the farms and factories that produced food. The military needed something different. They needed food that was easy to carry, long-lasting, affordable, and capable of surviving difficult conditions. This was where Spam became valuable, because inside a small metal can was a product that could travel almost anywhere. It did not need refrigeration. It could be stored for long periods, and soldiers could prepare it with very little effort. As World War II expanded, the demand for reliable food supplies increased dramatically. The United States government began looking for products that could support troops at home and overseas. Spam quickly became one of those important supplies. Factories increased production. Workers spent long hours preparing cans that would eventually travel across the world. From American factories to military bases to battlefields thousands of miles away, Spam became part of the massive effort to keep soldiers fed. But what made Spam truly unique was not just the food inside the can. It was the fact that this simple product solved a problem that every army faced: how to deliver a dependable meal in the middle of a global war. And soon, millions of cans of Spam would begin their journey across oceans, following American soldiers into one of the largest conflicts in history. When World War II reached its full scale, American soldiers were fighting in places thousands of miles away from home. From the battlefields of Europe to the islands of the Pacific, every soldier needed a reliable source of food. But delivering meals during wartime was extremely difficult. Ships crossed dangerous oceans, supply routes were constantly threatened, and every item sent to the front lines had to survive a long and uncertain journey. Among the supplies arriving with American forces was one familiar item, a small can of Spam. For many soldiers, it became a regular part of military meals. It could be eaten in different ways, freed in a pan, added to other foods, or prepared quickly when time was limited. Spam became especially valuable in the Pacific War. In remote islands where fresh food was difficult to find, canned products became essential. Soldiers needed food that could handle extreme weather, long distances, and difficult conditions, and Spam was built for exactly that purpose. During the war, millions of cans were produced and shipped to support American troops and allied nations. It also reached civilians living under rationing in countries where normal food supplies had been disrupted. For many people, Spam was not a luxury. It was a reminder that help had arrived. But not every soldier was excited to see another can of Spam. Eating the same food again and again created plenty of jokes among troops. Some soldiers gave it humorous nicknames. Others dreamed of the day they would return home and never have to eat it again. Yet behind all the jokes was an important reality. Spam was doing exactly what it was created to do. It was affordable, it was durable, and it was available when millions of people needed food the most. A simple canned meat had become a global wartime companion, one meal at a time. For many soldiers during World War II, Spam became a food they could never forget. But their feelings about it were complicated. On one hand, Spam represented comfort. In the middle of war, when soldiers were far away from their families and surrounded by uncertainty, a familiar meal could bring a small sense of normal life. A can of Spam was reliable. It was something they could count on when fresh food was unavailable. But on the other hand, eating the same canned meat again and again became frustrating. Many soldiers joked that Spam appeared everywhere. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, it seemed like there was no escape. The jokes became part of military culture. Soldiers created humorous names and stories about Spam because humor helped them deal with the difficulties of war. But behind those jokes was a deeper appreciation. The soldiers knew that having food available was not guaranteed. Every can represented a massive effort involving farmers, factory workers, truck drivers, sailors, and countless others working behind the scenes. While soldiers were fighting on the front lines, millions of American workers were fighting a different battle, keeping the supply lines moving. Factories worked around the clock to produce the food, equipment, and supplies needed for victory, and Spam became one of the most recognizable examples of that effort. It was not a glamorous food. It was not created to become famous. But during one of the most challenging periods in history, it became something much more important. It became a symbol of preparation, persistence, and survival. The world had entered a new era, and Spam's journey was far from over. Because after the war ended, this small can of meat would continue traveling around the world, creating a legacy nobody expected. When World War II finally ended, many wartime products disappeared. Factories returned to normal production. Soldiers went back home. And countries began rebuilding their lives. But Spam was different. The same qualities that made it valuable during the war made it popular even after the fighting stopped. It was affordable. It was easy to prepare, and it could be stored for long periods. In many places around the world, Spam became connected with memories of survival and recovery. One of the most famous examples was Hawaii. During and after World War II, Spam became deeply connected with Hawaiian food culture. Local communities found creative ways to use it in everyday meals. It was combined with rice, eggs, and other local ingredients. Over time, dishes like Spam musubi became a well-known part of Hawaiian cuisine. But Hawaii was not the only place where Spam found a new home. Across parts of Asia, especially regions affected by war and shortages, canned meat became a valuable food source. In countries rebuilding after conflict, imported foods like Spam represented access to something reliable during difficult times. What started as a wartime necessity slowly became something more: a cultural food, a familiar taste, and for many families, a reminder of history. Of course, Spam also developed a unique reputation. Some people saw it as a symbol of convenience, others saw it as a reminder of wartime hardship. But whether people loved it or joked about it, nobody could deny its impact. A simple canned meat created in 1937 had traveled across battlefields, oceans, and generations, and its story was no longer just about food. It was about how one small product became connected with millions of human experiences around the world. Nearly a century after its creation, Spam remains one of the most recognizable canned foods in the world. What started as a simple solution to a food problem in 1937 became a product connected with one of the biggest events in human history. During World War II, Spam helped solve a major challenge. How do you feed millions of people during a global conflict? It traveled across oceans, it reached soldiers far from home, and it became part of the daily lives of people experiencing some of the hardest years of the 20th century. But the story of Spam did not end when the war ended. Instead, it continued through generations. Some people remember it as a wartime necessity, others remember it as a childhood meal, and some communities transformed it into unique dishes that became part of their culture. Today, Spam is still sold around the world. It has become more than just canned meat. It represents innovation, adaptation, and the incredible role that food can play during moments of crisis. Because sometimes, the foods that change history are not the most expensive or luxurious. Sometimes they are the simple ones, the ones that can survive difficult times, the ones that reach people when they need them most. A small metal can may not look powerful, but during World War II, that small can carried something much bigger than food. It carried hope, it carried survival, and it became a reminder that even ordinary things can have an extraordinary impact. This was the story of Spam, the meat that fed millions during World War II.